The American dream is within reach, but you have to have fairness.
And if you do your work well and you learn the skills and you become dependable, you will work your way up.
I don't believe you ought to interfere in the market. If you look at the OMB studies and you look at the good economic models, the benefit is small. The cost of lost jobs is great. It goes against the free market principles.
Walmart would have to raise their wage to just above $13.63 an hour. Doing this for all of its employees would cost the company $4.8 billion each year. If Walmart wanted to pass those costs on to the consumer, they'd have to raise their prices by about 1.4%. For example, that means that box of great value mac and cheese would jump from 68 cents to 69 cents.
I don't believe you ought to interfere in the market. If there's to be a minimum wage, my theory is if Oklahomans want a minimum wage, we ought to have it. I don't believe there ought to be a national minimum wage. That's my position. I'm the only member of the Republican Party that's still here that voted no on the last one. And I believe that markets work better than bureaucrats.
I don't think it's the government's business to be setting the minimum wage out there. And even the CBO said, if you want to get rid of a million jobs between now and 2016, raise the minimum wage. And here's the issue, Pat, and I think you got to believe this. At a time when jobs are at a premium in this country, the last thing you want to be doing is putting policies into place that will kill jobs.
I support people making more than $9. I want people to make as much as they can. I don't think a minimum wage law works. We all support, I certainly do, having more taxpayers, meaning more people that are employed, and I want people to make a lot more than $9. $9 is not enough. The problem is that if you can't do that by mandating it in the minimum wage laws. Minimum wage laws have never worked in terms of helping the middle class attain more prosperity.
Do you believe in a minimum wage?
Well, I think that when you look at raising it, all of the studies show that if you raise it, you get more unemployment. So really the marketplace does a better job at determining what this should be.
So there shouldn't be any federal minimum wage?
I'm not so sure I'm saying that, but I think what I'm not sure I have an answer as far as whether there is a right or wrong.
United States Senator, you've thought about whether or not there should be a federal...
Not necessarily, but what I have thought about is that raising the minimum wage causes more unemployment. When we have 20 million people out of work, I think it's a bad idea to raise it.
Wherever you raise the minimum wage, you necessarily cost jobs because some employers will decide, I can't afford that any longer. We watched that change the economic climate. You can't drive into a gas station any longer and get someone that'll wash your windshield, check your oil, and fill your tank. That's what happens when you do this. The minimum wage is the government interfering in between the relationship between the employer and the employee. And in the end...
So you think there should be no minimum wage?
I think that what we should have done is left the minimum wage alone and just let it drift away and let the economy grow the way that it shall.
A wage hike would impact 28 million Americans. 28 million Americans. That's what we're talking about. 4.6 million Americans would be lifted out of poverty.
Republicans in Congress have found the time to vote more than 50 times to undermine or repeal the health care bill for millions of working families. Earlier this month, they voted for a budget that would give the wealthiest Americans a massive tax cut while forcing deep cuts to investments that help middle-class families, but they won't raise wages for millions of working families when 3/4 of Americans support it? That makes no sense.
Well, let me jump in. I don't believe in it.
You do not?
We can debate. I do not.
All right. So you do not believe in the concept of the minimum wage?
That's correct.
You would abolish the minimum wage?
Correct.
Today, Senator Tom Coburn said there should be no national minimum wage at all.
We don't know what the minimum wage should be. How'd they pick 10.10? Why not 22? Why not $100? I don't believe you ought to interfere in the market. If there's to be a minimum wage, my theory is if Oklahomans want a minimum wage, we ought to have it. I don't believe there ought to be a national minimum wage. That's my position. I'm the only member of the Republican Party that's still here that voted no on the last one.
I can think of 14 million reasons to raise the minimum wage, and that's the number of children whose economic fortunes would be lifted if the minimum wage moved to $10.10 an hour. Children who would have more, who would be in homes that are more secure. 1 million adults that would be lifted out of poverty if we raised the minimum wage. And you would think that Republicans would be interested in this because the more self-sufficient people can be, then the less money that all of the taxpayers have to spend on supplements, on Medicaid, on food stamps. This is about people who work full-time, who are out there really busting their tails, trying to support themselves and their families, and just raising the minimum wage enough that they can make that happen.